Welcome to the Kingsbridge is Simple and Secure podcast, where we will discuss no building threats, no people threats, no third-party supplier threats, and no systems attacks. All these combine to create chaos for your business, and they will be battled by King Phoenix and his shield.
Hi, welcome to the KISSBCP podcast. I'm your host, Roswitha. Like and subscribe to the KISSBCP podcast wherever you listen or watch. And now, on with the show.
Hi, welcome to the KISSBCP podcast. I'm your host, Roswitha Firth, and with me today is Leona Cohen, who has been a past guest, and we loved her so much we wanted to have her back to talk more BCP. Hi, Leona. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Roswitha. Thank you for having me back.
Absolute pleasure. So before we get started, I thought perhaps you could say just a few words about your background and experience for guests who may not have seen the other episodes that we did.
So most of my career of 22 years has been in business continuity management, to include emergency response, crisis and incident response, and all the delicious things that go into the business continuity planning cycle and the business continuity management program design and development.
Great.
My career has been in financial technology primarily, and also just simply technology.
Great. Well, thank you again for joining us today. You've got a ton of experience and expertise to share. And so when Leona and I were sort of brainstorming the next BCP topic that we wanted to tackle, we came up with planning effective tabletop exercises. And we come at this from slightly different experiences. So we'll both have some things to share that you will hopefully find informative and useful to you today. So we'll go ahead and get started. So before we dive into the details, let's briefly talk about scope of a business continuity exercise and what kind of goes into the different sort of parts of the scope that we would consider when planning an exercise.
So when planning the scope of the exercise, you really need to consider the plan that you are exercising. If it's a business continuity plan, a smaller audience versus if it's a crisis management plan, you will have a broader scope. And you want to consider what are the most plausible or most likely scenarios that this particular group is likely to encounter. So that helps dictate your scope. Also, the time allotted will also help dictate your scope as to how in depth you want to go with your scenario, or do you want to keep it broad? So really thinking about that and thinking about the purpose of the exercise makes a difference. If it's their first time exercising, your scope may be more high level. If this particular group, they've done the exercise before and they have quite a mature plan, you may then start getting more detailed in your scenario.
Absolutely. So one aspect of scope that I want to bring into this is whether or not your plan is focusing on a specific department, perhaps a location, or is it an enterprise-wide tabletop exercise? So that's something to keep in mind as you're thinking about the plan that you have and what is it actually, and like you said, what's the purpose of the exercise? And to your point about kind of complexity and duration, tabletop exercises, as you know, can be anything from sort of a 2 hours in a conference room to a multi-day semi sort of live event where the people involved are sort of doing their daily jobs, but meeting regularly and are getting pushed out messages with live injects that they then have to respond to as if it was actually happening. I don't recommend that for your first or second exercise for sure, but it's a great goal to look forward to, especially if you're trying to mature a program, because that's definitely part of it, is like you said, sort of maturing the exercise from the first high level to, as the team matures, as the plans mature, truly sort of testing that, exercising that. Great.
No, definitely. And what I'd like to talk about is more of the discussion based. We're either
Yes.
could be sitting around a conference room table or virtually, as many of us do now. And also many teams are geographically dispersed. So I, more often than not, in fact, I'd say the majority of my career has been via video, because I've worked with teams across the globe. And so it necessitates everybody coming onto a Zoom meeting. And pre-exercise to me is very important. It is what sets the expectations. And so to set up an exercise, first of all, obviously you want to make sure your plan has your incident response team members, those who are going to lead the recovery process when a disruption happens, as well as their alternates. And hopefully they have alternates listed. So the most important thing is the invitation, because that invitation right there is going to set the tone, and it's going to set the expectations. And make sure to invite all of the incident response people, leads and members, and they're usually their alternates as well. We would have discussed that in advance. In the invitation, basically state what it is we're doing, what's a tabletop, why are we doing it, and very important, express that their presence is very important to the success of the exercise. And if they cannot attend, please send their alternate or somebody in their place. And that right there gets everybody to the table, or at least the majority of people. And then I also will attach a copy of the plan that is being exercised, and I will ask them to be familiar with the plan in advance of the exercise and to have the plan available during the exercise. I want them to know this isn't, a closed book test. No, we're exercising the plan. So all of that in a concise manner in the invitation, so that they know upfront their presence and their participation is expected. For myself, my exercise prep, in addition to sending out the invitation, will include looking at the plan. Do I see any potential gaps in the plan that I might want to fold into the exercise? And then, as I mentioned earlier, what are some of the most plausible types of incidents that are likely to happen? Of course, things that have happened in real life, I wouldn't have even thought of.
That's very true.
A fire in a sugar field, knocking power out for the entire country of Panama. Never thought of that one. And so I think of ones that probably more likely could be a hurricane, power outage, or depending on where they are and what the risks are in their area. And then laying out that scenario bit by bit and asking a series of questions in between those injects of the scenario unfolding, really to get the discussion going. Those questions don't have to be hard set, have to stick to these questions, but it's to help generate that discussion during the exercise. That's my prep. Day of exercise, we all get on the call. And again, I explain what is it we're doing, why are we doing it, and very important, I really want people to understand this isn't a gotcha. It's not to put you in the hot seat. It's to, we're exercising the plan, seeing if there's any things we can do to improve it. And B, this is a training exercise to help you and help build that muscle memory and that mental muscle memory as well. at time of disaster, and by thinking and looking at the plan from a different angle than just reading it on a piece of paper. So I really do my best to put people at ease, and I let them know, please participate, challenge yourselves, ask each other questions, ask yourselves questions, and use the plan. And I try to keep it also, I'll add a little humor in there to help put people at ease, not make it haha funny the whole time, but just do things to help put people at ease and get it going. Then one of the first things I do before I go into the scenario is I pull up the plan and I go over that table of contents. The reason I do that is because I want to remind them that you're not going to look at a plan, read it from page 1 to page 10 at time of disaster. There's certain information you want and you need. And so what we go through that, say, here's where you find this. Here's where you find that. And then Appendix A is where you find this or that. I want them to be familiar with that. And I also do that so that at time of disaster, again, if we talked about this last time, if their mind does a switch or they're thinking of so many things at once, hopefully they'll have a gentle voice in their head that says, go to the table of contents. So that they can remember that and be like, okay, this is where I find, this is what I need. Here's where I find it, and not have to,
Panic.
go through. Yeah, panic, go through pages. I don't know where it is. So I do that. That's why I do that.
Yes.
Then we start going through the scenario, inject one, followed by some, initial questions. What are your thoughts? Might ask some things specific in the plan. And as we move through the exercise, a couple things I pay attention to is, one is somebody, maybe one person doing the majority of the talking.
Right.
And of course, that happens sometimes. And then some people may be less inclined to do some speaking. And so I'll pay attention to that. And then I'll try to elicit responses from everybody. I might ask people very pointed questions, or it might be the same question to different people. But what do you think for your role, for what you have to do? What do you need to do? How does this affect you, et cetera, et cetera? One thing I missed in the pre-exercise is I also assign a scribe.
Yes.
And that person, that's important.
Yes.
I'll try to take notes, but it is very hard to facilitate and take notes. So I'll do my best. So during the meeting, the scribe is capturing the discussion, but also if during the course of the discussion, people say something and I'm say, okay, where in the plan is that? Or is that something we want to add to the plan? Oh yeah, that would be great to have in the plan. So I'll just call out, let's add that as an action item. So that's for the scribe to really notate that. And then we'll just continue the discussion. I'll also pay attention to flow, the time. If people are going down a rabbit hole on one piece of minutia, I'll bring it back in and keep it going. And then also say, for the sake of time and also so that we can get through, let's do, let's go on to this, or I'll throw in an assumption, or I'll just say, as a facilitator, I have the right to throw things in just to keep it going. So I might throw in an assumption, or I might throw something into the scenario just so we can go.
And you just said what was on my mind like a second before, and then the word popped out of your mouth, facilitator. There can be a tendency to sort of run the exercise, which may have its place in certain situations. But I think in terms of getting people's participation, it's much better when we can facilitate an exercise rather than run an exercise. And so I'm so glad that you said that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do think it's important that the team is doing the talking. I'm doing the listening because they know their business. And I will continuously try to bring that out. Now, most times, I will say, thankfully, most times it does generate good discussion and time flies. The biggest fear, I always get butterflies right before an exercise because the biggest fear is like, nobody's going to say anything. Everybody's going to sit there silently, right? It's a continuity profession. You're like, oh God, what if they don't say anything? And you have to draw it out, really.
Yeah.
I find, though, really, I'd say at least 90% of the time, once it gets going, they start talking and then they start talking to each other. And I really just facilitate, and then I'll throw in and add to the scenario.
Right. Yeah.
And then leave time at the end to review action items and say, okay, who's going to do that and by when? And what's your target date? Is that a reasonable target date? Okay, put something reasonable that you can handle. And if possible, do a quick debrief feedback at the end. If there's no time, we can do that later. And of course, thank everyone at the beginning and at the end. They're giving their time, they're putting in effort, they're thinking this through. So I'm very appreciative of that. And then after the exercise, again, send out an email, thank everybody, review the action items so that they know what they want to change or add to the plan, and along with the agreed upon due dates. And if we didn't have that opportunity to talk about, debrief, or give feedback, I'll also solicit feedback, or I'll solicit additional feedback if we did. What would you have liked to have seen? What can we do better? So that's really the end to end, from pre-exercise to post-exercise, that I go through.
That's a great summary, and it's high level enough and detailed enough that this is the one YouTube video that you need in order to plan an effective exercise. You don't have to go any further. This is it, right? You had mentioned in one section of our conversation certain gotchas or tips or tricks. So I just wanted to mention a couple of additional items in the process of getting the lead incident command person, whatever role they have, and their alternate or a delegate. That's one of those gotchas that can happen, is that sometimes the person that's shows up that this has been delegated to really isn't the right person because they don't have the knowledge. They are a team member from that department, but they may not have the background. And so even if they read the plan in front, they don't know what to say. They don't have any experience in responding to an incident or having gone through an exercise. And so that's always, for me, something to really pay attention to, the attendee list and who's responding. And if I foresee that there's a problem with someone who's replied yes because they've been assigned this, then I always try to go back to the original person and say, look, I get you're a vice president, you're out of town this week, and your director can't do it, and then your manager can't do it because of this other reason, and then we're down to an analyst of one tiny part of a department who cannot possibly succeed in this role, and we want success for this. So
Right.
That's sort of like the big gotchas, I think. And you had mentioned the other one, somebody who is always doing the talking, having to kind of handle that in a pleasant but effective way to make sure the conversation goes. And you gave great examples of how to do that. And then on the tips and tricks things, I think you included the big things. Use a little bit of humor, explain the why. And I think I had one other note on that that came up when I was thinking about it, but those are the big ones, right? Use a little humor, make it, and not make this be any kind of fail test language.
No.
You got to quash it, right? People come into it many, many times thinking that it's a test and that you can fail at this. And there is no failure as long as you're learning something. So those to me are the things that I wanted to kind of highlight from your excellent summary, to make sure people are being mindful of that as they think about the planning as well as the actual tabletop exercise, making it as effective as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And also in those tips and tricks that you just mentioned, I may put the person who is really speaking, doing all the speaking, and others don't get an opportunity, I may just very kindly put them on vacation on an island somewhere.
One of those great injects.
Also, if somebody isn't doing any speaking, again, I will gently call on them and I'll ask them something regarding their role. And oftentimes, that's the person who brings up something that's nobody thought of. And I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. People don't want to be humiliated. They don't want to be embarrassed. That's why it makes people nervous. It's so important to put them at ease. And I'm like, go for it.
I have
test it.
I have one final note before we wrap up. And your experience has largely been global teams, so you've done a lot of this virtually. Mine's been a mixture of in-person and virtual. And the one thing that I would say is that if you are doing this in person in a conference room, plan ahead for food and make it good. There is nothing that sets up success for any kind of a big meeting if you have donuts or breakfast tacos or lunch or whatever it is, if that's at all possible in the company culture and the budget. It's that nice little thing. People start to talk around the food and get comfortable with each other. Like there's a lot of soft benefits aside from preventing hangry in a meeting like this, especially if it's going to last a while.
I love that.
All right. Well, thank you again, Leona. It's been always a pleasure to have you as a guest. Really enjoy the detail that you bring to the conversation. And
thank you.
We drop a new episode every 2 weeks. Leona's will be coming up shortly, so keep an eye out for it. And if you didn't see the previous episodes that we've done together, you will not want to miss those. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.